Hello and welcome to Digitech. Today we're going to do a project that introduces loops. Loops are really useful for doing the same code a bunch of times, sometimes with slight differences, but generally it's a huge time saver if you've got something that you need to execute until some condition is true. So we're going to start a new project called ello, and it's based on the kind of the stereotypical British greeting, British police officer greeting, I guess it would be. And our project is just going to output the word ello with the apostrophe to omit the H as many times as we want to. So we'll have a little loop. It'll just run round and round and round and round and round as many times as we say. So for ello, it would be 3 times. So here I'm just setting up the project as usual with bare bones HTML. It's just barely enough HTML to interface with the JavaScript, because our main focus is going to be obviously getting into that JavaScript file and learning how to do the loop. A lot of these projects build on each other, so in this loop we'll be using input and output as well. So if you need a refresher on those, you can look back on some of the other projects that do those things, like connecting to input fields in the HTML to get inputs from the user, and connecting to like paragraphs and stuff to output to the page. So with our library load and everything working, now we can get into making the HTML specific to this project. And this one is just a single button. We're trying to focus mostly on the loops, so there's not a lot of inputs and other stuff like that. Sorry, not just a button, also a paragraph. Obviously we need somewhere to put the output. But yeah, we're focusing mostly on loops in this project, so it doesn't have a lot of inputs to like how many times you can say hello. If you wanted to extend the project, you could certainly do that yourself. So as you can see, we've just got a button and a paragraph. The button will kick everything off, and the paragraph is where you'll see the output. But before we get into any of that, we need to connect jQuery. So I'm just going to copy the latest uncompressed version. If you're doing a proper production version, A, you probably wouldn't be using jQuery, and B, you'd use a more compressed version, because in a production version, speed is everything. And if your website takes a long time to load, if the user has to download a whole lot of JavaScript, it can negatively impact performance. So you'd use a compressed version to speed everything up. But here we don't really care, so we're just using the uncompressed version. While I was chatting away, you could see that I started a new JavaScript file and connected it with the script tag, and obviously the defer at the end of it says don't run the script until the end of loading up the page, because it's got some stuff in there like the paragraph and things that you need to connect to, but they're not created at the top of the HTML file. So by the time you get to the script, the browser hasn't seen it yet, it might get confused. Anyway, with everything set up, we can now get into writing the code, and as usual, the button will kick off this particular chunk of code. So we'll connect to the button, and on the click event, I'm going to set up all our brackets so that when it's clicked, everything inside these brackets is going to run. First thing is always variables. And we're going to set reps as how many repetitions of the word ello are we going to do. So the reps is currently set to 3. And as I said before, if you're extending this program, you might have that get the reps number be got from an input, but for this one we're not. Now you can see I've set up the basic structure of the loop. So I've got let I equals 0, which is going to be our iterator. An iterator variable is like a counting variable, and with the loops we're going to count up to a certain number. In this case, the number of reps. So I is going to start at 0, and then it's going to go all the way up until 3 in this case. And each time the loop goes around, it's going to do everything inside these brackets. And there's 2 things inside the brackets. Result equals result plus ello, which is going to add a new ello every time the loop goes around. And then I equals I plus 1. So every loop, we're going to add 1 to I. Otherwise, we'd never get to that while condition of I is less than reps. So it would go around forever if we didn't have the plus 1. So in this case, it starts at 0, it does the loop, then it goes to 1, does the loop, goes to 2, does the loop, and then when it gets to 3, it says that it's not less than reps, so I is not less than reps, so it stops. And here I'm just playing around with the reps so that you can see that you can get the code to do the loop as many times as you need. And I can just change one character and get the code to do a lot more work. And that's basically it. As soon as we click that button, it sets up a bunch of variables, and then it runs that code inside the while loop 3 times in this case. And just some testing on some boundary values like 0 and stuff like that. And because we are good, responsible coders, we're going to comment to the code that we've done. So the I variable starts at 0. And until I gets to the reps number, every loop it's going to add another ello, and it's also going to increase I by 1. It's extremely common to forget to add 1 to I and get an infinite loop, but that's what happens. And that'll do it for our first introduction to loops.